And good afternoon. We'll go ahead and call to order the regular meeting for the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals for October 24th, 2012. First item on our agenda is the consideration of minutes for our regular meeting from September 26th. Those minutes were included with our agenda materials. Are there any changes to those minutes? If not, those minutes will stand approved as presented. And we'll first pick up with some old business from our last meeting. It was a variance request, and it is application Z12052 by Mr. Mike Chaudhary. He's requesting a 200-foot variance from Section 21B4 of the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, which states that the sale or distribution of gasoline, diesel, or other fuels for motor vehicles will be permitted in the commercial fringe zoning district only when developments for such are set back a minimum of 200 feet from any property zoned in the RS or RD classifications. And this request was pertaining to property located on the southwest corner of New Salem Highway and St. Andrews Drive. And Mr. Blomley, if you'd review that application for us, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Rogers, and good afternoon, Chairman Rogers and members of the board. One thing that I'd like to get into the record before I go over any of the further details on this application, I did put a letter in front of you today from Terry Weekland, who is the owner of the property, and you'll notice that the original applicant, Mr. Chaudhary, is no longer involved in this project, but the owners of the property, Terry and Paul Weekland, who make up New Salem Strategic Investments LP, wanted to move forward as the applicant. And after consulting with the planning director and the legal department, we have no issue with them moving forward as the applicant. So I wanted to let the record reflect that they are the new applicants for this item. As you'll recall from last meeting, we held a public hearing on this request, and the item was deferred. The board had some questions that they wanted to get additional information on. The request is for a variance to the requirement in the CF zone that developments that sell gasoline or other types of fuels must be located at a minimum of 200 feet from property line to property line from another piece of property that is in the RS or RD zone. The former applicant, Mr. Chaudhary, had the property under contract and went to the Planning Commission, had a site plan approved as well as a master plan for the property as well. And I'll go over into some of the details of that in a moment. But the approval of his site plan was contingent upon this variance being approved because his property is zoned commercial fringe and it is within 200 feet of property that is located in the RS-15 zone. You'll recall that the board had questions as to whether or not it was appropriate to grant the variance request with the applicant's justification that he felt in the future the balance of his tract would be, or the balance of the tract would be zoned something other than the RS or RD zoning classifications, making the requirement a moot point. The board had much discussion about this, and as has been reflected in the minutes that were just approved, as to whether or not it would be appropriate to grant the variance or urge the property owners to make application for rezoning for the balance of the tract. And if we could call up the aerial photo here. Property itself is located on this corner here, and it is zoned commercial fringe. The nearest developed single-family residential lots are to the south in Bellhaven and to the west in Bell Reeves Section 3. And from the subject lot that was proposed to be divided off of the main tract, it was about between 800 and 1,100 linear feet to the nearest developed residential property, to the residential subdivision. The balance of the tract, as I mentioned, though, is zoned RS-15. And you'll see here on the map the frontage along New Salem Highway and the frontage along St. Andrews is zoned commercial fringe, while the balance of the tract is still zoned RS-15. The board asked for additional information from the applicants and from the property owner as to why they were requesting this variance as opposed to rezoning for the balance of the tract. You'll find a letter in your application materials from the representative of the applicant, Mr. Bill Huddleston, who is also the design engineer on the project. He stated that the applicants are not developers, that they have no intention of developing the remainder of the tract at this time, and they wish to actually raise cattle on the remainder of the tract for the time being. And so at this point, it didn't make sense for them, according to Mr. Huddleston, to request rezoning for the balance of the tract. Mr. Huddleston also mentioned the fact that there is a detention pond on the approved master plan, and if we can pull up the site plan, what he has done in his exhibit, and you have this plan in front of you, the large 24 by 36 plan, is this hatched area here is the area that is within 200 feet of the proposed gas station lot. And you can see that that area is predominantly the detention pond area, as well as a bit of it is the part of the Colonial Gas pipeline easement. It should be noted that the detention pond, if the gas station lot is developed, the detention pond would not be required to be developed with the gas station lot. That would be required to support future development on that overall tract. In addition, I told the board at last month's meeting that I would provide additional information with regards to the zoning history of this property. And as I mentioned, the frontage along New Salem Highway and St. Andrews Drive is zoned commercial fringe. The balance of the tract is zoned RS-15. Let me tell you a little bit how it got to that point. The property itself was annexed into the city limits in 2005, and it was actually additional area that had to be annexed because other parcels in the immediate vicinity were requested for annexation, and this parcel was, for all intents and purposes, surrounded by the proposed city limits. So we studied it as additional study area and ended up annexing it as additional area. It came into the city limits with an interim zoning classification of RS-15 in 2005, simultaneous with annexation. Per Section 17 of the zoning ordinance, residential property in the county, absent a simultaneous zoning request with the annexation, comes in with a interim zoning classification of RS-15. Then back in 2009, the property owners made application for the frontage along New Salem and a portion of the frontage along St. Andrews to be zoned PCD, Planned Commercial District. That application was pulled after it got to the city council level because there was not enough specificity in that application. With a PCD zoning application, there is a certain level of specificity that is required and a certain definite development plan before it can be considered for approval. So the applicant regrouped, made application as commercial highway for the exact same area. So the entire tract was never considered for rezoning, just the portion that's zoned commercial fringe right now. And then after the request was made for commercial highway along the frontage, what ended up being approved by the city council was commercial fringe zoning. And that's how we get to the current zoning on that property. Mr. Bill Huddleston, representing the Weeklands, is present if you have any questions for him. As I mentioned, he is the one who submitted the additional information. And Mr. Weekland is present as well. Mr. Paul Weekland, if you have any questions for him. He is the property owner. As I mentioned, Mr. Shadhari is no longer involved with this application. We conducted a public hearing last month, and this item is coming up under old business since it was deferred, so no public hearing is necessary today. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Baumley. Questions for Mr. Baumley? All right. Mr. Huddleston, Mr. Weekland, anything you all would like to add to this?
Good afternoon, Chairman Rogers and members of the board. My name is Bill Huddleston with Huddleston Steel Engineering. I don't have much to add other than I do want to thank you for hearing us today. We could not be here last month. I had a conflict, and Mr. Weakland's father happened to pass away that very day, so he could not be here either. As Matthew said, these are not developers. They simply inherited this property. In fact, I don't even think they asked to be into the city back when it was annexed. So the property behind what we're looking to develop at this point is came in under an interim zoning of RS-15. Main thing I want to point out to you is that, and Matthew, if you could pull that exhibit back up that shows the triangle in question, there's no way there will ever be a house on that property. That is encumbered by an existing gas line easement, and also drainage easement and access easements have been approved by Planning Commission for that triangle. So there aren't any houses within 800 or 900 feet of this area, and so for those reasons we ask for you to approve this request.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Huddleston. Questions for Mr. Huddleston?
Bill, you one question that I had that you answered, but I think it would be good for everybody to hear, and that is that the question of trying to just zone this particular portion as commercial fringe, because you're not able to do that because you can't have it as a platted lot because it didn't have any access. Could you go over that?
That's right. We couldn't create this as a separate lot of record because it wouldn't have any frontage onto State Route 99 or St. Andrews Drive. It's in the back, and we wouldn't have any way to access it. So Planning Commission could not approve this as a approved lot.
So the ordinance requires that these particular commercial purposes have to be more than 200 feet off of RS-15 property. And in this case, what we have is property that for at least 800 or 900 feet, there is no buildable RS-15 property, right?
Well, no, for 800 or 900 feet, there's no existing house within 800 or 900 feet. You know, I suppose somebody could come in and develop a residential subdivision behind this if they so choose, but that is not the intentions of the Weaklands at all. And even if that did happen, there would not be a house available or there would not be land available for a house to go into this 200 feet. Because of the encumbrances of those easements. Yeah,
and that's what I guess that's what I'm getting at is right in saying that there, at least for 200 feet, there is no buildable RS-15 property within this from this commercial property.
That's correct. These easements have already been either in place and or approved by Planning Commission in our master plan process.
And if that were to change, it would require Planning Commission approval or BZA approval or City Council approval.
And if they were to revise their master plan so that for some reason the detention pond ended up being relocated, that would require going back to the Planning Commission for an amendment to their master plan.
Those gas lines are in the ground. There's very, very, very small likelihood that they will ever be moved.
Okay. Any other questions?
I don't have any questions for Mr. Huddleston. I do have a question for Mr. Adelot.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Weakland. Appreciate you.
Mr. Adelot, I think that as part of their planning process, it may have been indicated that they come before or suggested that they come before the BZA for this variance. And I was wondering if you could give us as a board some insight as to why that recommendation would be made from a planning standpoint.
There's some really unusual circumstances that surround this property. The first one is the ownership. Most of the time when we look at a development plan, we're looking at a developer who has development plans. He purchased the property and evaluated with a development plan in mind. In this case, that's not present. In this case, they had the property, and they're wanting to sell a portion of the property because in their circumstances, they're finding that they need to. This property has an unusual circumstance about it and the gas line crosses it. The gas line crosses it at a diagonal, which really, in many respects, make it a candidate, really it makes a hardship upon the property that's really a textbook example. Because there is that part present that is not typical of other property in the city that is zoned commercial fringe, that is nearby to residential property. The property also has an unusual circumstance in the way that it drains. With our stormwater regulations, we're requiring that they put in place a stormwater detention, retention area on the west side of St. Andrews Drive to support the development. The ideal location for it that will support not only the lot on the corner is also the little triangle area. It serves more than one site. The Colonial Pipeline itself is a little bit unusual. They are a very difficult organization to deal with. They have a very delicate, well, they think it's very delicate. We're not always sure it's delicate, but they treat it as if it's very delicate, gas line. And they don't want to see crossings across it for access or for utilities or for drainage unless it's well planned and minimized. They want to keep them to a minimum. So with that, in that context, as we reviewed the plans with the applicants and looking at their desires not to be selling more property in the immediate future, their desire to keep it in an agricultural situation, to perhaps keep the tax status as a green belt, and the time frame that they were on, I suggested that they should pursue a variance, that they did have the elements that would make a hardship that the Board of Zoning Appeals could consider in this. This is a bulk regulation. This is not a density issue, and there's no prohibition in our ordinance that would prevent the Board of Zoning Appeals from being able to consider this for a variance. In fact, when we drafted it, we viewed that there might be times when an applicant could mitigate the very things that we're concerned about, and that could be considered as a part of the totality of an application before the BZA.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Aylock. All right, are there any other questions or discussion? Are we ready for a motion?
Mr. Chairman, just as we talked about last time, just looking at the triangle, even taken aside from whether they have to come back or that ends up not being a detention pond, as a practical matter, I just would find it difficult that there would ever be a residential structure built in that triangle. And based upon what Mr. Aylott has told us about the planning's thoughts, and it seems apparent that if there is any residential in the future, it's going to be beyond this 200 feet. And we were really talking about the triangle in my mind, and any concerns that I had, to me, have been alleviated. So based on that, I'm going to make a motion that we approve the application subject to staff comments.
If I might interject, if the board does choose to approve this application, since the original applicant is no longer a part of the process, I think we would want to make sure that it is subject to the current location on the property on a separate lot of record, so that the approval is tied into this particular location on this property on a separate lot of record, as opposed to giving a blanket approval for anywhere on this tract that may be zoned commercial fringe.
And let me just ask a question. And the purpose in that would be is if the design of the lots, say, changed or something changed with respects to this undeveloped portion of this property, they would, without question, have to either go back before planning and or the BZA. Is that the point?
No, I think what I'm trying to accomplish in that is that we have a specific plan that was initiated by a specific developer who is no longer in the picture, and so to kind of make sure that the approval goes with the plans that have been submitted, the approval be specific to the plan that was submitted, that is before you today, as opposed to perhaps them shifting it over slightly on the existing lot, or.
It's plan specific and not applicant specific.
Correct. Correct.
That was my assumption in the motion, that as submitted, regardless of the change in applicant, that the plan itself is what we're approving, the locations and the distances and all that. That would be included in my motion. It's plan specific and not applicant specific.
As well as a separate lot of record.
That was wasn't that one of the conditions already?
That's what they proposed, but this will just get that in the record.
Whatever conditions were on it, I mean, it has to be, they'll have to plat it as a separate lot of record. That's how I understood the application.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. To Mr. Weekland, Mr. Huddleston, that application has been approved. Appreciate y'all coming back in and clearing some of those matters up for us. All right. Next, we'll consider new business. There we have some signed variance requests. Looks like we have two. First one is application S12050 by Mr. Michael Rubino of GPD Group for Thornton's. He is requesting a variance from section 25 1/4, 24A22 of the City of Murfreesboro sign ordinance, which prohibits a sign placed in or over a public utility or drainage easement. And this is for property located at 2908 Medical Center Parkway. Ms. Kerr, if you'd review that application for us, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, members of the board. The applicant, Michael Rubino, with GPD Group, is representing Thornton's, Inc., is requesting a variance from section 25 1/4, 24A22 of the City of Murfreesboro sign ordinance, which prohibits a sign placed in or over a public utility or drainage easement without the easement holder's consent and the approval of BZA. The sign location is within an RM16 is within a commercial highway GDO 1 zone. The applicant is requesting permission to erect one internally illuminated freestanding wall sign with 55 square foot of display area and an overall height of 10 foot. 38 square foot of the 55 square foot display area of the sign will be an automatic price changer unit with an opaque background and will be manually changeable. The sign will be located within a 40-foot public utility easement. The agreement for a sign in a City of Murfreesboro easement has been, for this location, has been signed by the Murfreesboro Water and Sewer Department, Murfreesboro Electric, Director of the Building and Codes. Letters of approval have been received from Atmos Energy, AT&T, and CUD. CUD has agreed to the current location placement of the sign within 3 foot of a main water line and has required a rotatable monument sign mounting system that will allow CUD a 10-foot, 9-inch clearance from the sign to the water line. Thornton's has submitted an engineered drawing to meet CUD's requirements. Due to the sensitivity of the placement of the sign in regards to the utility lines, staff requires that the sign be located on site by a Tennessee registered engineer or surveyor, and that a form for certification of a sign placement be provided prior to permitting. Also, upon installation of the footing and sign, both a sign inspector and a representative of CUD will need to be present. The applicant will comply with all other setbacks and regulations, and Mr. Rubino is here to answer any questions as well as myself.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Kerr. Questions for Ms. Kerr?
Ms. Carr, you did say the changeable part of that sign is manual, correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. All right. When you said changeable, my ears perked up,
Yeah.
but then you said manually, so I wanted to make sure.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kerr. Mr. Rubino, anything you'd like to add to the application?
Good afternoon, and thanks for hearing our appeals this afternoon. I really have nothing more to add than what Amelia provided. Just wanted to thank staff for their flexibility and their patience with us as we've gone through this process. What we're presenting is a kind of a feat of engineering, in my opinion, for a monument sign, and we appreciate the city's flexibility along with the utility companies.
All right, thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Rubino? Thank you.
Thank you.
This time we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the sign variance.
Second.
It's motion subject to staff comments,
I don't think it was any.
if any.
Yes, there are. One
Are there?
is sent by a surveyor and also the representatives of the sign department and the CDD present. So, yeah, it should be subject to all the staff comments.
Thank you.
All right. We've got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, Mr. Rubino, that application has been approved. And we'll move on to application S12055 by Mr. Bobby Kirby for IPM. He is requesting a variance from section 25 1/4, 24A22 of the City of Murfreesboro signed ordinance, which prohibits a sign placed in or over a public utility or drainage easement. And this is for property located at 2018 Medical Center Parkway. Ms. Kerr, if you'd review that one for us, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Rogers. Members of the board, the applicant, Mr. Bobby Kirby, representing IPM, is requesting a variance from section 25 1/4, 24A22 of the City of Murfreesboro sign ordinance, which prohibits a sign or foundation placed in or over a public utility or drainage easement without the approval of the easement holder and approval from Board of Zoning Appeals. The sign location proposed at 2018 Medical Center Parkway is a planned unit development inside of the Gateway District Overlay 2 zone. The applicant is requesting permission to erect one push-through style internally illuminated freestanding wall sign with 60 square foot of display area and an overall height of 9 foot. The illumination portion will be an opaque background and only the letters and graphics will show. The sign will be located on Medical Center Parkway and is within an existing 20-foot water line easement. The agreement for a sign in the City of Murfreesboro easement has been signed by the Director of Building Codes in the Murfreesboro Water and Sewer Department. There is also a 2-inch gas line without a recorded easement at this location, and Atmos has submitted a letter requesting that the sign footing be placed 3 foot from the gas line, and the applicant has agreed. The applicant will comply with all other setbacks and regulation. And myself and Mr. Bobby Kirby are here to answer any other questions that you may have.
All right, thank you, Ms. Kerr. Any questions for Ms. Kerr? Can you orient me where on Medical Center Parkway this is?
It's the new home of Firehouse Subs.
Yep.
We could call up the,
Yeah, got it.
you could call up the aerial for the computer, please. It's at the Walgreens is at the northwest corner of Medical Center in Thompson. It's the new multi-tenant office building right next to the Walgreens.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mr. Kirby, anything you'd like to add to the application?
I hate to crawl over everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I really have nothing else to add other than what Ms. Kerr presented.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Kirby? All right. Thank you, sir. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come forward. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
I'll make a motion we approve, subject to staff comments.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Kirby, that application has been approved. And thank you, Ms. Kerr. We'll now consider variance requests, and there we have application Z12056 by Mr. Gary Wisniewski for Stratford Hall LLC, requesting a variance from Section 34, Article 5A5 of the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, which states that in all flood-prone areas, all electrical, heating, ventilation, plumbing, air conditioning equipment, and other service facilities shall be designed and or located so as to prevent water from entering or accumulating within the components during conditions of flooding. And this request is pertaining to property located at 1320 Charleston Boulevard. All right, Mr. Blum, if you'd review that for us, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Rogers. Subject property is located along the east side of Charleston Boulevard in the Stratford Hall subdivision. If we could pull up the aerial. It is this lot that is shown to be vacant right at the current terminus of Charleston Boulevard. And it is currently being constructed on now, though, even though this aerial photograph in 2011 shows it vacant. There is currently an existing single-family residential building permit, and the house is partially completed and is being constructed as we speak. It is identified, as you mentioned, as 1320 Charleston Boulevard and is also Lot 114 of the Stratford Hall subdivision. It is located in the vicinity of what is commonly referred to as the Big Ditch. The subdivision plat for Section 3 of Stratford Hall did not include minimum pad elevations and minimum floor elevations for lots 111 through 114. During the rain event of May 2010, water entered the attached garage of the single-family dwelling to the north on lot 113, which is this existing house that is shown on the aerial photograph. After having received this report, the city engineering staff asked the design engineer to restudy Stratford Hall Section 3 using best available information pertaining to the Big Ditch to investigate whether or not it would be appropriate to require minimum pad elevations and minimum floor elevations for certain vulnerable lots. The surveyor of record for Section 3, who is also the design engineer, recorded a surveyor's certificate of correction in August 2010, adding minimum pad, minimum floor elevations to lots 111 through 114, so as to prevent any future construction from being inundated and or damaged by floodwaters associated with the Big Ditch. Section 34 of the city's zoning ordinance is entitled Floodplain Zoning. It contains the city's floodplain management regulations. The statement of purpose in Section 34 states that floodplain management regulations are in place in part to minimize public and private losses due to flood conditions. It also states that the regulations are to require that uses vulnerable to floods, including community facilities, be protected against flood damage at the time of initial construction. One of the objectives listed in Section 34 is to protect human life, health, safety, and property. Section 34 applies to both special flood hazard areas, as they are denoted on the FEMA firm or flood insurance rate maps, as well as what are called flood-prone areas. Section 34 of the zoning ordinance defines a flood-prone area as any land susceptible to being inundated by water from any source. As a lot in a flood-prone area, Lot 114 of Stratford Hall is required to comply with the provisions of Section 34. The applicant obtained a building permit to construct a single-family residence on Lot 114 on August 16, 2012. The new minimum pad, minimum floor elevation, as denoted on the surveyor's certificate of correction that was recorded in 2010, were placed as conditions of approval by the Planning and Engineering Department and were included as conditions of the building permit by the Building and Codes Department. A copy of the building permit signed by the applicant can be found in the board's agenda materials. The MPE is required to comply with Section 34, Article 5A5 of the zoning ordinance, which states that all electrical, heating, ventilation, plumbing, air conditioning equipment, and other service facilities shall be designed and or located so as to prevent water from entering or accumulating within the components during conditions of flooding. The city considers the garage as a service facility for the single-family residential structure and therefore requires it to be constructed to a certain elevation so that water cannot enter or accumulate within it. The applicant is requesting a variance from the above provision in order to lower the minimum pad elevation for the proposed attached garage on the subject property. He has included a plot plan showing the proposed house, which is currently under construction, as well as a narrative with his reasons for requesting the variance. Staff has also included photographs of the subject house and property, which I'll show you in a moment. But right now, if we could pull up the computer screen, you'll see the plot plan that the applicant has submitted, and you have a copy of that in your materials as well. The MPE that is required for this lot by the city and denoted on the surveyor's certificate of correction is 609.75 feet, while the required minimum floor elevation is 610.75 feet. The applicant has indicated that he will comply with the minimum floor elevation for the habitable area of the house. He is requesting a minimum pad elevation, however, of 607.75 for the garage, meaning that the garage floor would be 2 foot lower than the predicted high water elevation associated with the big ditch. The primary reason provided by the applicant for his variance request is the slope of the driveway. The driveway and garage for this lot have alley access to the rear. As you'll see on the plot plan, the very top of the page, you'll see the alley, which is part of the, which is a private alley owned by the Stratford Hall Homeowners Association, and the driveway, which is about 20 feet in length from the back of the garage to the alley itself. The driveway and garage for this lot have alley access to the rear, as I just mentioned. In his materials, the applicant indicates that the 18-foot-long driveway, which is shown as 20 feet on the plot plan, will slope up 30 inches from the alley to the garage. He states that this will result in a slope between 16 and 18%, which in his opinion is unsafe. Rather than elevate the garage to meet the minimum pad elevation requirement, he proposes to floodproof the garage. And just as an FYI, floodproofing is defined in Section 34 of the zoning ordinance as any combination of structural and non-structural additions, changes, or adjustments to structures which reduce or eliminate flood damage to real estate or improve real property, water and sanitary facilities, structures, and their contents. One of the goals of the floodplain management regulations is to reduce property damage. The planning and engineering staff feels that the most effective way to accomplish this goal is to elevate structures above the high water line. The planning and engineering staff is not in favor of the granting of this variance. It is known that in May 2010, floodwaters entered the garage next door on lot 113, which according to the exhibit provided with the variance application is at an elevation of 608.26. While floodproofing may help to reduce similar potential damage on lot 114, it will not prevent water from entering or accumulating in the garage as is required by the city's floodplain management regulations. As an aside, for slab-on-grade construction in special flood hazard areas, which are the areas that are denoted on the FEMA flood insurance rate maps, floodproofing is only allowed for non-residential construction and not for residential construction. According to the city's environmental engineer, based on the 100-year flood prediction with the big ditch, the potential water depth would be 2 feet during an extreme 100-year event. More frequent lower water depths could happen as well, so the water incursion into the garage would be an ongoing issue. With regards to the slope of the driveway, the city engineering staff has researched acceptable slopes for both driveways and parking. And additional information from the engineering department can be found in your materials on our engineering department's research. The result is that there is no consensus among various jurisdictions regarding what is acceptable. There are different standards that are used. The applicant states that if the garage was built to the required minimum pad elevation, the residents may experience difficulty and be subjected to an unsafe situation trying to park on the driveway and exit the vehicle. However, other than the opinion of the applicant, no evidence has been presented that this is the case, and the city engineering staff is of the opinion that the proposed driveway slope is acceptable. In addition, the engineering staff calculates the driveway slope to be 13.5% with the current elevations and the required 609.75 minimum pad elevation, as opposed to the 16 to 18% slope stated by the applicant in his application materials. If approved as requested with the 607.75 minimum pad elevation, the resulting driveway slope would be 4% and would have 0.8 feet of fall from the garage to the alley. The board should also note that the alley behind lot 114 was built by the original subdivision developer 9 to 15 inches lower than what was shown on the approved construction plans for Section 4. The Section 4 construction plans made some modifications to the Section 3 plans. The engineering staff has consulted with the design engineer about the possibility of raising the alley grade behind Lot 114 in order to reduce the slope of the proposed driveway on the lot in question. This work could be done in conjunction with the construction of the infrastructure for Section 5, as the Section 5 construction plans have been submitted to the engineering department for approval. The current subdivision developer has indicated, however, that it is his preference for the applicant to apply for a variance for Lot 114 rather than raising the elevation of the existing alley, even though raising the alley elevation would help to reduce the driveway slope on Lot 114. The engineering staff has calculated that if the alley behind Lot 114 was raised by just 6 inches, it would reduce the driveway slope on Lot 114 from 13.5% to 11%. Now I'll show you some photographs. First, some photographs submitted by the applicant. You'll see here he has a tape from the alley to the proposed minimum pad elevation at the back of the garage. Here he has circled the area with the proposed minimum pad elevation and where it is located on the back of the garage. Here he is showing the driveway next door at 1324. That's the house next door that had water enter within the garage back in 2010. And here he is showing the distance from the built house that he is building to the fence next door. And I also have some photographs for your review as well. This is the front of the house, and I was out there this morning, and they've made quite a bit of progress in just the week and a half since I've been out there. That's the front of the house looking from Charleston Boulevard. There's another view of the house from the alley just to the south. Looking back towards the garage, and back toward the subdivision that you see behind that is the Prestwick subdivision. This is once again looking at the side from the alley. This is looking at where the garage is proposed to go. The driveway would connect here from the alley. This is once again looking at where the driveway would be located going back up to the garage. And just another angle of the same thing with the house at 1324 in the background. And this is just another shot of the existing garage and driveway at 1324. One of the things that I wanted to mention to you was one of our engineering inspectors, at the direction of our engineering, our city engineer and the city environmental engineer, went out to some adjacent lots or some nearby lots in the Stratford Hall subdivision using a digital level to determine what the slopes of those driveways were. And what he found, in his opinion, were likely the driveways with the steepest slopes in Stratford Hall were just across Charleston Boulevard from the subject property. They're located on Scarlet Drive. And he found that there were 2 driveways nearby on Scarlet Drive that had over 17% slopes. And just to kind of give you an idea of what 17% slope would look like. And once again, just as a frame of reference, the applicant's proposed slope is 13.5% as calculated by the engineering department. You'll see this house, which is located at 1946 Scarlet Drive, has an estimated slope of 17.6%. The driveway may be a few feet longer than Mr. Wisniewski's proposed driveway. This is a view of that driveway from the alley where it gains access. And then the house at 1942 Scarlet, which is right next door to the one we just looked at, once again is alley accessed and has a estimated slope of 17.1%. And that's just a side view of that driveway. That concludes my staff comments. Mr. Wisniewski is in the audience today if you have any questions for him. In addition to myself, other members of staff are present if you have any questions for them. Mr. Joseph Adelot, the planning director, who also serves as the city's floodplain administrator. Mr. Chris Griffith, the city engineer, is present. And Mr. Sam Huddleston, the city's environmental engineer, is present. If you have any questions for any of us, we'll be happy to answer them.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bomley. Questions for Mr. Bomley?
Matthew, those houses you just showed, were they the slope and the driveways as a result of just topography, or were they meeting this minimum floor elevation, or did it even apply in that area? Were they?
Mr. Young, I'm not sure if there were any minimum pad or minimum floor elevations established for those lots. Mr. Huddleston may have recollection. Is that a no recollection or a no? He doesn't have any recollection of.
Okay.
Mr. Baum, the application is for variance from the ordinance that says that in all flood-prone areas, all the equipment has to be designed or located so as to prevent water from entering or accumulating during flooding. Okay, so let's say he's where he wants to be. He hasn't located it so that he's prevented it from. But you mentioned he's talked about doing some flood proofing or designing that would prevent it. What flood proofing is he talking about doing?
He may be able to better answer that question as to what construction methods he proposes to do that.
And am I reading it right? It is designed and or located. So you could either design or locate it. It could be located where it's subject to flooding, but if it's designed to prevent it, then you've met the requirement of the ordinance.
I think in our interpretation, and Mr. Sam Huddleston may wish to address this as well, is that floodproofing would not accomplish the goal of preventing water from entering or accumulating. It may reduce that impact, but I don't know that there is any method that would entirely prevent that water from entering or accumulating within the garage. Mr. Huddleston, did I state that correctly?
So the garage would count as electrical, heating, ventilation, plumbing, and air.
Well, the garage would be a service facility that would serve the house.
Okay, so that's how you get in the garage. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Rogers, members of the board. I think there are two issues here. One is what the ordinance says about elevating or preventing water from accumulating, and then the other issue is the use of flood proofing. As a matter of practice, we talked about elevating for residential structures, elevation being the preferred method, especially for garages, because those areas will be used to serve the residents. They'll use them for storage of materials and appliances, perhaps, and other things like that. And so, as a general rule, we would discourage flood proofing in the residential part of that structure. The question about elevating it or designing it, a lot of that deals with utilities and how they're connected or how they're constructed so that you prevent water from accumulating in the components itself, more so than it deals with the actual finished floor of a garage or a storage area.
Do you know what flood proofing he's talking about doing here?
I would speculate and say that it would be use of construction materials that would be less prone to flood damage. For example, eliminating things like drywall, carpet, wood products that are not intended for wet conditions, maybe relying on masonry or concrete, maybe using solid concrete walls instead of block walls so that water doesn't get trapped in the voids, that sort of thing. That'd be my speculation. We have not seen a proposal from Mr. Wisniewski on exactly what he would propose to do, but just that he would propose to do that as a remedy in this situation.
Okay. Questions for Mr. Huddleston? All right, thank you. All right. Mr. Wisniewski, anything you'd like to add to the application?
Chairman Rogers, members of the board, thank you for hearing this today. We in no way want to circumvent the code and/or create a hardship or safety issue, not only for the dwelling, but for any resident that would choose to buy it. The reason for this application today was not to go ahead and put the house in harm's way or the folks that may buy it. It was to simply go ahead and reduce the grade. It is on an alley load, as you saw in the pictures. It's also 18 to 20 feet long in the driveway. At the grade that we're looking at, it's going to be any place between a 13 and a 16%, which compared to the house next door, which is only at 6%. There's a couple concerns that we've had. Number one is that with the finished floor elevation that was now imposed on these lots, the lady living next door, Miss Kay Perkins, that we spoke with yesterday, will be, her garage is over 1.5 feet lower than what we're proposing if we follow the MPE. And also the home is about a half a foot below the finished floor elevation of the house that we're building. We have gone ahead and raised it so the finished floor of the house is at the minimum floor elevation. Being that it's higher than her is a little bit of concern. If you're familiar with Stratford Hall, there's minimal distance between the homes. That was the reason for the picture showing 5 foot up to her fence. The other concern she had was that the home when it's built on the other side, home site 112, will also be raised to that, so therefore she'll be the lowest one in that bank of homes, directing water her way. Once again, we could build it as is with the minimum pad elevation for the garage. However, we decided to go with the BZA request in order to lower that down to make it a safer issue for those who are parking. The driveways that Matthew went ahead and took pictures of are considerably longer. That one there is practically 30 feet, almost 10 foot longer than the one that we've got. Plus, it's not on the narrow alley street that we've got behind us, so it's a little easier for whoever buys to get in and out. As far as flood proofing, the code does allow for flood proofing to happen, and the flood proofing that we would present is what's actually in the Murfreesboro Code under flood proofing, and that would be Article 5, Section 3. And as far as designs, it says the designs for complying with this requirement must either be a certified professional engineer or architect and meet the following minimum criteria. Provide a minimum of 2 openings having a total net area of not less than 1 square inch for every square foot of enclosed area subject to flooding. The bottom of all openings shall be no higher than 1 foot above finished grade. The openings may be equipped with screens, louvers, valves, other coverings or devices, provided that they permit the automatic flow of floodwaters in both directions. This area that we're looking at lowering on the minimum pad is the garage. The garage is built with cinder block wall structure. We didn't pour the garage floor yet until we've got a ruling on this variance. The rest of the slab was poured, and yes, the CMUs, the concrete blocks, were core filled. Any equipment that would go in that garage would simply be a hot water tank, which will be a endless hot water tank which hangs on the wall. So there will be no equipment or anything in that garage utility-wise or equipment that would be subject to the flooding. Once again, we're simply trying to lower the grade in order to make it more accessible for those buying the homes. We decided to go into Stratford Hall into a joint venture with Mr. Bob Parks and Mr. Jerry Benefield in section, the next section, I don't know if it's 4 or 5. We are currently building a model of front on Lot 2 and this inventory home on 114. We would assume that we're going to sell most of the homes there to the empty nester demographic, which is who lives at Stratford Hall as it is. We're simply trying to prevent a safety issue with a large sloping driveway on a short alley street. Could we build the house and complete it the way it's proposed with the minimum pad elevation? Absolutely. We're just trying to go ahead and set this up in the future so somebody can get in and out of their car safely. Also, with talking with Miss Kay Perkins next door, we asked her exactly how high the water came in her garage. She stated to me yesterday morning that the water never came in the garage. It did come in the driveway, but never actually entered the garage. I wasn't there. I don't know. I didn't see it, but that was from Miss Kay Perkins yesterday morning.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Wisniewski. Any questions?
I've got one. Mr. Wins, have you, just curious, in just my history of dealing with flood insurance and lending institutions, do you, I'm assuming y'all have, and this has no bearing on this variance request, but just out of my curiosity, have y'all researched where you're going to stand when you try to resell this property, and from a lending institution standpoint as to whether they're going to have a problem from a financing standpoint?
Well, from what I was told thus far, it shouldn't be an issue for a few reasons. Number one, this is not actually in the 100-year floodplain. However, it is in the city high water area. So this isn't on one of the FEMA maps that's showing that it's a high water area, number one. So therefore, they couldn't get flood insurance, I don't believe, if they wanted to, because it's not in one of the zones. The other reason we wanted to flood-proof the garage is that it is allowable in the code to go ahead and flood-proof it. So we can show due diligence that we've gone above and beyond to make sure that if there ever was a situation, which has happened one time, that they would still be covered.
One point I'll make, anybody can get flood insurance whether they're in a flood zone or not, so just, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matthew, can we get a copy, or can I see a copy of Section 34, Article 5A5?
Sure.
Of the ordinance? It wasn't quoted in any of the agenda materials, was it?
It's Section 34, Article 5A5 is exactly what's in the
agenda.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Which states that in all flood-prone areas, all electrical, heating, ventilation, plumbing, air conditioning equipment, and other service facilities shall be designed and/or located so as to prevent water from entering or accumulating within the components during the conditions of flooding.
Okay.
That's taken directly from the ordinance.
Can I see that?
Sure.
Just a second. And let me ask you just a second. But the flood proofing that you're planning to do, if it's what you're talking about there in the ordinance, that talks about creating holes and that sort of thing that are designed to allow for the entry and exit of floodwaters to automatically equalize hydrostatic flood forces on exterior walls. That means water kind of coming and going, but it doesn't, according to the ordinance, prohibit it from entering.
That's correct.
Okay. Are you proposing any kind of flood proofing that would prevent water from entering the garage?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Benefield.
Mr. Chairman, as the developer of this project, I got one thing that I need to say. We're in a joint venture with Gary to build these houses, and we sold him this lot. And we had no idea that any of these changes had been made by the city. We weren't notified that the minimum floor levels had been changed, or they were looking at them, or they had been studied. And that's regrettable. We might have done something about it prior to this. I just want to know, it's not his fault. I guess it's our fault, but we didn't know about it.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Benefield.
I have one question, and maybe I'm just, we're asking for the variance to 34.5A5. That's the request. If we grant this, there's still the minimum pad and minimum floor elevations. I guess I'm wondering how these because we're not being asked to waive those requirements. Do they have another step they're going to have to go to be able to build below those elevations? I mean, does this give them what they need? Is that question making sense?
Yeah, the minimum pad elevation is set to comply with that requirement in Section 34, and relief from this from Section 34.5A5 would effectively be relief from that required minimum pad elevation.
The only concern I have, I mean, I know that it's probably maybe retired people that move there or whatever, but just in case somebody else bought it, I know folk are always changing garages over to recreation rooms and stuff like that. And that could be a disaster, I guess, if it wasn't elevated like it should be.
Yes, they could, but I believe that would have to go through the city codes department in order to allow that to be changed into habitable space.
Yeah, they would have to get a permit to do that.
To do that.
Another question I have, if this variance was granted, how is it that the remaining 2 lots that are in this area, or there may be more that are in line, what effect would our decision today have on those other 2 lots, if any? Irrespective of whether Gary's the one building on it or not.
Well,
is that a fair question?
That is a fair question. And lots 111 through 114, if we could pull up the aerial photo, I believe that's 111 down to 114. So there are still 2 lots that have minimum pad, minimum floor elevations that were included on that surveyor's certificate of correction. And you know, obviously, just like Mr. Wisniewski has, the owner of those lots or the contractor could come before you to request a similar variance.
All right, while we're pondering that, thank you, Mr. Wisniewski. We're going to go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussion or questions.
So the pad elevation he's proposing is higher than the neighbors.
I believe it's,
but
I believe it might actually be a little bit lower. He's proposing 607.75 as a proposed pad elevation, and the neighbors to the north, according to the elevation that SEC shot as a part of the plot plan, is 608.26. So his proposed pad elevation would be around a half a foot lower than the garage next door.
And some 2 feet lower than the amended pad elevation that was on the amended plat.
Yeah, exactly 2 feet lower.
Something's not right.
The city's suggested elevation is what, Matthew? 610?
Well, the required
for the garage
609.75, and he is requesting 607.75, and the garage next door is at 608.26.
Okay. Is this an all or nothing thing? Can we have some flooding and not all out flooding?
Never know.
Well, I mean, you know, I guess you go back to, don't rely on me for high school geometry, but if the neighbors next door are at 608 and they're at 6% grade and we're asking to go a foot higher and he's saying it's going to more than double that grade, I guess, I don't know how that.
Seems like there's a cotangent involved in there somewhere.
Yeah, that's when I quit, cotangent.
Mr. Huddleston, can I ask you a question? If we didn't grant this request and we pretty much made them get to this minimum floor or elevation with respects to the garage, do we have any idea? I think Mr. Wisniewski was saying how it would impact the Ms. Perkins. I don't know if she's here or not. Can we evaluate that one way or the other, or not really?
The overall grading of the lot will not change significantly by lowering the finished floor of the garage. That's all the way at the back of the lot and just about 40 feet from the edge of the big ditch. All of that water will want to travel across the alley into the big ditch. It would be the side yards in the front that would impact any drainage directed toward the adjacent lots or toward the alley beside them. And doing something at the very back, in my mind, has little or no bearing on what waters may be directed. Just as a note of practice in that area, I noticed that most of the builders, or at least most of the residents, route their downspouts, because these houses tend to be very long compared to the width. They route their downspouts all the way to the rear of their lots. I've noticed that on several lots of these alley-loaded products there. So they've apparently taken that into consideration somewhere in the living at the home, or at least in the construction of the home.
Mr. Olson, what caused the city to go? I assume the lady on lot 113 called the city and said, Mr. Wisniewski said she didn't have any water in her garage, but I mean, I assume there was some event that caused the city to relook at these pad elevations. Do you have any information for us on what?
That's correct. We actually received a call from the Owners Association president, as I recall. I don't have the notes in front of me, but immediately following some of the flood events, and we had literally hundreds of properties we were looking at in May of 2010. Right. But this was one we went back and evaluated. The report we got from the Owners Association was that water entered the garage. And so we took that at face value. Whether it actually specifically entered it on that event or came very close, there was enough of a trigger there for us to say, hey, what was going on there? And so we went back and pulled some records, and we have a flood study that was prepared by Gresham Smith and Partners for the city in 1986, predating the development of Stratford Hall. And that information I shared with the design engineer shortly after the complaint came in, and we looked at it and agreed that the flood elevation for that part of Stratford Hall was 609.75, and is exactly where we set the minimum pad elevations. And that's consistent with our practice. When we know a flood elevation, predicted flood elevation, we want to set the pad elevation at or above that.
You said the design engineer, their design engineer, or who?
The design engineer for Stratford Hall Section 3 reviewed that with, and it get a little bit into plating and design here, but the surveyor of record is Mr. Bill Huddleston, but the engineer of record is also Mr. Bill Huddleston. And it's the surveyor who prepared the plat that created the lots. And so we actually talked to the surveyor and engineer in one step there, but I reviewed the flood information from the flood study we did, and we agreed the best course of action would be to set future pad elevations and future finished floor elevations based on that flood study from 1986.
So I take it by Mr. Benefield's comments that information wasn't conveyed to the developer? I'm getting lost here.
Well, at that time, the lots were of record, and they had the potential to be transferred or built upon without any review by the developer. These were private lots available for any for purchase by anybody. And there was a change in the model floodplain ordinance that we adopted a few years ago that requires the floodplain administrator and the Building and Codes Department to review each building permit application for applicable floodplain information. That was not a standard when Stratford Hall Section 3 was proposed, I think in, I'd have to look back at my dates. Matthew, do you remember the dates on that? But Stratford Hall 3?
I don't recollect.
And the easiest way to say it is we're getting better at doing what FEMA expects us to do, but at the same time, they continue to expect more out of communities who participate in the flood insurance program in trying to prevent flood damage. And that's what this is about, is trying to prevent flood damage. And of particular note, they're trying to prevent flood damage to residential properties.
The minimum pad elevations, when we talk about these numbers between the neighbor and between this proposed lot, the numbers give us from sea level or from some other distance, so we're talking apples and apples. If they're both at 608.75, they would both have the same susceptibility to water. It doesn't, that's to even the playing field. Am I right about that?
That's correct. There is
so it wouldn't be, the numbers are the same, but because of something about the law, there would be a different, the purpose of that is to say we've got to start from a common point.
Measuring from the same baseline. And in this particular stretch of the big ditch, the flood profile is extremely flat. Normally you think you're downstream, the flood profiles are lower, but because of the way this particular part of the big ditch was constructed, it's very flat. And so Prestwick, Stratford Hall 3, Stratford Hall 4, future Stratford Hall 5 are all subject to a very similar flood profile.
And you may or might be able to answer this. So if this house had the same pad elevation as the house next door, why is it that we would expect this grade to be higher than the 6% next door? Does that have to do with some other factors?
Well, there are a little bit. The garage on lot 113 was built low. It was built below where we would recommend it to be. And if we had it to do
the
over,
same, but what was actually built is below where it was supposed to.
That's correct. If we had it to do over, if we could back up before we issued the permit on 113, we would say, hey, build the garage at 113 at this elevation.
Mr. Dodd, lot 113 was built prior to that certificate of correction being recorded. So that wasn't made a condition of the permit for lot 113 as the condition of the permit will be for this lot and the two lots to the north.
So what's the actual pad elevation of one?
The actual garage floor elevation for lot 113 is 608.26.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yes, it's at 608.26.
So even as built, it's at 608, and he's asking to be a foot below that.
About 9 inches below that.
Okay. So that's what I'm trying to figure out is. I understand that it was built below the pad elevation, but he's wanting to build even below where that actual floor elevation is.
That's correct. In our opinion on that,
this would be even more susceptible to water than the one next door.
Yes, the frequency of flood events would be higher, and the duration of flood waters in the garage would be higher based on that additional 9 inches. And the other thing that comes into play here is the elevation of the alley, because eventually they're tying their driveways into the alley. And the alley does have some slope behind those lots. And at lot 114, the alley is at its lowest point. So
that would impact the slope of the driveway.
That impacts, yes, where we're tying into and where we're starting from. Okay. And as you go up the alley, is the easiest way to say it, toward lot 113 and then 112 and 111, the alley's actually...
That's mitigated as you go up the road.
Yes. And quite honestly, that was part of our, suggestion to the builder here is, hey, maybe we need to look at raising the alley and not lowering the garage. And that way, we're not vulnerable to flooding, and you get a more desirable driveway slope. And incidentally, you ask about what's the impact on other lots. The preliminary plat and construction plans we have approved for Section 5, which would be immediately south of Lot 114, we're requiring the garages to be at the 609.75 and the finished floors to be at 610.75. The alleys behind those garages are a little more favorable, with the exception of one or two lots that are similarly situated.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Huddleston.
Sorry, I didn't wear you out. I'm just trying. You know you're going to be a math teacher today. Dude.
Chairman, if I may, I want to step outside my usual role just a little bit. I rarely comment one way or the other on requests for variances, but it seems to me that we're approaching some dangerous ground. I think these flood elevations are not quite the same as minimum side setbacks or rear setbacks from a property line. It does appear that in this circumstance a mistake was made when Lot 113 had a house constructed on it, and I guess before that a mistake was made by the developer when the developer built the alley 9 inches, if I recall, lower than what was called for on the development, the construction drawings. And essentially, as I see it, what you're being asked to do is compound a mistake. Whether water actually entered this garage or not, statistics tell us that water has a greater chance of entering that garage in the 100-year event than it would if that garage floor were at the 109.75 elevation. Now, when you have the 500-year event or the 1,000-year event, you know, it could get wet anyway. But we don't build to that. We build, if I believe the numbers right, to the 100-year event. And I think that rather than, as a policy matter, it seems to me inadvisable to allow another person to be in the same or worse now with an even lower floor elevation circumstance. And while the water heater may be hung on the wall and be safe from any water protrusion, I think those of us who live in homes know that frequently we want to put a garage refrigerator. We have cardboard boxes of a variety of things sitting on the floor. And while the builder may not have anything damaged, we're not really protecting the builder here. These are designed to protect the ultimate homeowner. And I believe that this board has the power to grant this variance. We looked very carefully at that before we allowed this matter to be put on the agenda of whether the BZA would even have the power to grant this, and I believe that the board does. But I will say that from a staff point and from a property protection and property owners protection standpoint, it's my opinion that this would be inadvisable to allow a property, a finished garage in a residential unit to be built below the recommended flood elevation.
You know, I agree with you. I'm not sure. There is an argument, though, that what Mr. Wisniewski's, I think his point is that you go to the other side of that coin and say you can compound the problem by creating a drive. This is their argument. You can compound the problem by creating a driveway that's too steep. These homes are going to be marketed to people that would include seniors or people that may not have a lot of ambulatory ability, and so if you get a little bit of ice on it or just the sheer steepness itself, trying to park on a driveway that may be a little slick or wet, the more you increase the steepness, the greater those risks are. I did definitely see both sides, and that's why I was asking earlier, is this an all or nothing thing? I would almost be inclined to say, I don't want to go below 608.26, but 608.75, which is a foot of variance, may serve as some sort of compromise to serve his purpose a little bit, to lessen the steepness, but then also take it out of the floodplain by a foot.
I guess
split the baby.
I have two thoughts on that. The first is I think, as part of Mr. I's point, is that this 9 inches that the developer didn't build it to as it was submitted would mitigate that slope. The second thing is, and my concern is, if you're considering or not considering buying this house, the slope is something that's evident to you as a purchaser. You can see that. You know that, and you either believe that's a problem or not, and you buy it based on whether you think that's going to be an issue. The 100-year flood issue is something that I think most folks have assumed that the city is looking out for them on, and that's something that you don't know until it happens. So I understand the counter argument, but I mean, to me, what we're trying to do is protect against the unseen versus what would be seen or obvious, which is, do I want a driveway that's really sloped or not?
And if I may, right around the corner there are some driveways that have a steeper slope, and that they're a foot or 2 or 10 foot longer driveways doesn't take away from the steepness of the slope. So in terms of an icy situation or something like that, whether you've got an 18-foot driveway or a 50-foot driveway, if it's slippery, it's slippery. So I don't see that the length of the driveway has a great deal to do with anything. I understand the steepness being a concern in a area that is, as I understand, largely marketed to not necessarily seniors, but not to young families with young children, certainly. But as that is something that should be obvious to the person who's looking at this, and a choice they can make. There will be other houses with less slope and some with more.
I live in a flood area, and a neighbor of ours decided to go against the rules and dig out and put a basement in. And when the waters came, it filled that basement full of water. So it was frightening. It was one of my neighbors, been a few years ago. So I don't think it was a fun thing for them. They went back and did what they should have done in the beginning. So.
As I'm listening to the arguments, I feel for applicants when something happens, maybe they feel like they didn't know about initially, but I have a hard time waiving the rights. It's based on what we've got, I would probably tend to support the Section 34 there. Kind of my thoughts of it.
All right, Mr. Wazinski, you'll have the last word. Anything you want to say? You came back up to the podium. Anything else you want to say?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, a couple things. Number one, thanks again for hearing this, and especially Matthew for putting a lot of hard work into this. We understand the flood issue. With building for the last 25 years here in Middle Tennessee, we've seen a lot of concerns at a lot of the properties that we've built when we had that strong flood in May. Matching the elevation or coming a little higher than the neighbor next door on her garage floor at the 608 would be very amicable. That will reduce the slope of the driveway at this home and plus not push any water on her. The only thing I wanted to mention is because the driveway comes out the back in the alley and the grade would have to come up to the top of the drive, therefore that would be pushing more water onto her if we came at the elevation as proposed. Because we've got to bring the grade up to the top of the drive in order to make it safe for getting out of the car, and that would in fact push more water her way. So it won't affect anything on the side of the house, but in order to bring the grade up to the drive, it will push more water her way. So, thank you again for hearing this.
All right. Thanks, sir. All right.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I don't understand that last statement. it seems to me that, and you know as well as I do that I'm not a design engineer of any kind, but it would seem to me that you can shape the slopes. You can do a variety of things. I mean, these aren't immediately on top of each other. There's a few feet between the two driveways, and I would think that it would be possible to design that driveway assuming a 60975 elevation for the garage floor so that you did not, in fact, put more water onto the neighbor, and I would think that might be something that could be required even at site plan review or site plan approval. And there are some engineers in here, and if I'm wrong, then I would like one of them to tell me, or perhaps one of them could tell me that, yes, we can design around this so that building this house to code would not increase the severity of the issues that affect the neighbor.
All right, I think unless there's any other discussion, I think we're ready for a vote on this one. Ready for a motion anyway.
I've been talking the most, and everybody's looking at me. I guess here's my takeaway. At this point, Mr. Wisniewski, there's no way I could even consider, making it lower than the neighbors. We try to find some accommodation, but for us to sit up here and pretend like that we know what a middle ground would be seems imprudent to me, because I don't know how we draw that line. So I'm taking your application as submitted, and based on that, I have to make a motion that we not approve your application. I just can't see approving it at the 607. So that's my motion.
I'll make a second. Okay. I'll second the motion.
All right, motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No.
No.
All right. It sounded like it was 3-2. The application was denied. All right, and we will move on. And we will now consider application Z12057 by Mr. Richie Boland for Middle Tennessee Christian School, and he is requesting a 10-foot variance from the minimum required 30-foot front building setback for accessory structures as stated in Chart 2. This is for property located in a medical district commercial zone at 280 East MTCS Road. The applicant is also requesting a variance from Section 25E5 of the zoning ordinance, which states that in all commercial and industrial districts, accessory structures and uses shall comply with the same front setback as is required for the principal structure. Mr. Blumley, haven't gotten used to you being on your new perch yet. You'd review that one for us, please.
Now that I'm more technologically sophisticated, you'll have to get used to me over here. Thank you, Chairman Rogers. The subject property is located at 280 East MTCS Road. It's the site of the Middle Tennessee Christian School athletic fields. And if we can go to we're already there. Thank you, Steve. It's at the cul-de-sac of East MTCS Road. The cul-de-sac actually dead ends into the athletic facilities. Here you have the field house, and to the east of the field house is the football field, and to the west of the field house is the baseball field. The applicant is requesting two variances. In his materials, he requested one, and then I determined there was an additional variance that needed to be acted upon as a housekeeping matter. The subject property, as I mentioned, is the athletic fields for Middle Tennessee Christian School. Just to the front of the baseball field, along the cul-de-sac of East MTCS Road, is a small field house. You'll see the cursor there. That field house was actually, I believe, relocated from the football field over to the baseball field It's a temporary structure, and they're looking to tear it down or to remove it and build a stick-built press box for the baseball field. When Mr. Boland came in to discuss this, we looked at the aerial photos, and it appeared that the press box, as the current press box was located, and as the proposed press box would be located, would be within the 30-foot front setback along the cul-de-sac of East MTCS Road. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and zoom it in here. You'll see that the proposed 10 by 20 building is approximately 24 feet from the front property line along the bulb of the cul-de-sac on East MTCS Road. In commercial zoning districts, accessory structures are required to meet the same setbacks as principal structures. So we have two variance requests here. We have a variance to the requirement that accessory structures in commercial districts, and this property is zoned CM, which is a medical commercial district, because it's proposed to be located in that front setback. We have a variance to the requirement that it is to be located in the front setback. And then we have a variance to that 30-foot front setback that's in the CM zone. Mr. Boland has stated that the plans that he submitted to the board are not final plans. The size of the building is somewhat fluid at this point, and he submitted 10 by 20 on the drawing as kind of a baseline. If it were a 10 by 20 building, it would be 24.11 feet from that front property line. However, the size of that building may increase, and so he is actually requesting a 10-foot variance so that it could be as close as 20 feet to that front property line along the cul-de-sac of East MTCS. And you'll see the plans that he submitted. As I mentioned, these are preliminary because the size may change. But it is going to be a stick-built building on a permanent foundation. And there's kind of a profile of it right there. According to the applicant, the new structure will be much more aesthetically pleasing than the existing press box, which is in disrepair. The applicant also states that the variance will not negatively affect any adjacent properties. He indicates that the press box needs to be located behind home plate where the field of play can clearly be seen. He also says that the 30-foot front setback along the cul-de-sac of East MTCS Road greatly limits the placement of such an accessory structure because of the proximity of the existing baseball field to the cul-de-sac. And now I have some photographs to show you. There's the existing press box. You see the boulders are right outside the right-of-way of the cul-de-sac. That structure would be removed. I have a side view looking at the distance from the press box to the right-of-way. This is as the press box faces home plate. This is looking from the press box to the property to the south, which is the Kingwood Heights Church of Christ.
I'm sorry, Matthew, which way are we looking at?
We're looking south, down East NTCS. And that building directly to the south, and you see you have the parking lot here that serves the church, and then further to the south is the Kingwood Heights Church of Christ. Okay. And then looking across the cul-de-sac, there are several what appear to be medical type residential facilities.
Is this to the north?
Oh, this is to the southeast.
Southeast. Okay.
Yet there are two facilities, one here and one to the south, that I believe are some type of assisted living or nursing home type facilities.
So southwest is the church, and this is southeast?
Correct.
Okay. Gotcha.
And then if you were to here's the church parking lot here. Right. There's that residential facility.
I got you.
And then, of course, the football field is directly across the cul-de-sac.
Right.
If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Mr. Boland is in attendance as well if you have any questions for him. As I mentioned, each of those two requests should be taken in separate motions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley? All right, Mr. Boland, anything you'd like to add to the application?
members of the board. The pictures really made that press box look pretty nice, but it's it's not really that nice. So it is a press box made out of press board. It was a temporary structure that was actually built for the football field, and when the new bleachers in the stadium was completed there, they just actually moved it around, and we're just trying to dress it back up. It is getting dilapidated. And you've noticed the end picture, the last picture they showed, had the steps coming up the end. Well, we're going to come around the front this time and put a door from the bleachers into it. So we're cleaning up a kind of a little trip hazard right there also. So this one just needs to go, and it actually is infringing on the 30-foot setback now. So we're trying to do it the right way this time.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Bowman? All right, thank you. Been about 30 years since I saw you last, isn't it? Been a while. All right, then at this time we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussions or motion.
I'll make it. Go ahead.
If there's no further discussion, I'll make a motion to approve the 10-foot variance, subject to any staff comments.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, now we'll consider the request for the variance from Section 25E5.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the Section 25E5.
I'll say.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Not all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Bowen, that application has been approved in its entirety. Thanks. It's good to see you again. All right, we'll now consider application Z12058 by Mr. Mike Jones for North Boulevard Church of Christ Men's Ministry, requesting a special use permit in order to operate a temporary outdoor vending establishment, which would be Christmas tree sales, in a commercial highway zone, and this is for property located at 1266 Northwest Broad Street. Mr. Bromley.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. It's that time of year again. It's not fireworks time, but it is Christmas tree time. Our next three applications are for Christmas tree sales lots. The first two are ones that we've seen on numerous occasions before. The first one, and so that for that reason, I will not go into great detail on them. The first one, located at 1266 Northwest Broad Street, is the site of the Kmart Shopping Center, the Broad Street Center. The applicant has been making application to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a Christmas tree sales lot for a number of years. To my knowledge, we've never had any complaints. The applicant is looking to operate this year's lot in an identical fashion to how he has operated it in years past. And just for your reference, the area where he has his sales lot located is this grassy area along West Clark Boulevard. That's a sensitive touchscreen there. Along West Clark Boulevard in the grassy area in between the drive off of West Clark Boulevard and the Kmart and the former Cornerstone Financial Credit Union. If approved, staff recommends the following conditions. The site must pass an electrical safety inspection prior to opening for business. An electrical permit must be purchased from the Building and Codes Department in order to obtain this inspection. And number two, the 8x8 portable building must comply with the 42-foot minimum required front building setback. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And Mr. Jones is in attendance as well if you have any questions for him.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bromley. Questions for Mr. Bromley? All right, Mr. Jones, anything you'd like to add to the application? All right, then at this time we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would please come forward. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
Should I move for approval of the special use permit?
And just to note, these should all be subject to all staff comments.
Subject to all staff comments.
Thank you.
Just as I was about to say.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, Mr. Jones, that application has been approved. And we'll now move on to application Z12059 by Mr. Dan Ongst for Boy Scout Troop 197 of Fellowship United Methodist Church. They too are requesting permit in order to operate a Christmas tree sale stand and an institutional group assembly use at church in a residential single-family RS-15 zone for property located at 2511 New Salem Highway. Mr. Bromley.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. This too is an application that we've seen in years past. 2511 New Salem Highway is the location of Fellowship United Methodist Church. If we could go to the aerial. Traditionally, what Fellowship has done in years past or the Boy Scout Troop 197 has done in years past, has had their Christmas tree lot here in this area of the site. And they're looking to do the same thing this year. The application is identical to years past. The only change is that much the same as the previous application that Mr. Jones made. Mr. Ongst is looking to put an 8x8 building on site, a temporary building on site to where he and his troop members and troop leaders can go in there for protection from the elements in case the wintry December Tennessee weather gets bad. So with that being said, the recommended conditions of approval are basically the same as for the last one, the electrical safety inspection and structures meeting setback requirements. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them, and Mr. Ongst is present if you have any questions for him.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Bromley? All right, Mr. Ongst, anything you'd like to add to the application? And at this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would please come forward. Seeing no one, declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
Chairman Rogers, if I may add one more thing. Our city council is currently considering an ordinance amendment that something that Mr. Ongst, after discussion with him, a situation that he brought to our attention with the Boy Scout troop, not being a business, with them being a nonprofit and trying to raise money for their troop. They were having trouble with the initial overhead with having the $500 deposit before they could begin operation. That was problematic for them. That was taking money away from potential inventory that they could be bringing into their lot. So what was passed by the Planning Commission and what is going through the City Council right now, it's passed on first reading, is an ordinance amendment where a Christmas tree sales site that is accessory to an institutional group assembly use can have the deposit waived if there is something in writing from the principal use on the property stating that they will assume responsibility for the cleanup. Since Christmas tree sales can only be accessory to the principal use on an institutional group assembly lot, for example, a church or a school, we have some kind of built-in mechanisms in place. The church, and in this case with the Boy Scout troop being a ministry of the church will, it kind of goes without saying that the church, both the church and the ministry will have a stake in making sure the lot is cleaned up. So what we've done is proposed an amendment, and as I mentioned, the Planning Commission and the City Council have considered it to eliminate that $500 deposit if the principal use submits a letter saying that they will assume responsibility for the cleanup. And that should be passed or that should be through third and final reading by the time Mr. Ongst is ready to move forward with this season. I just wanted to let you know about that change that is currently going through the process.
Would that affect, like Mr. Jones' situation, where he's not in a institutional group, he's just at a commercial highway property location?
Yeah, he would be required to pay the deposit, and you'll see Mr. Ongst has a second application, which will be the subject of the next public hearing, and he will be required to pay the deposit at the next location since they're not accessory and it's not institutional group assembly use. This would only apply where there's an institutional group assembly use, where there are Christmas tree sales accessory to that institutional group assembly use.
All right. I think we're ready for a motion.
I make a motion to approve, subject to staff comments
Thank you.
and conditions.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, Mr. Onks, that application has been approved, and now...
Maybe.
All right, and now we'll consider application Z12060 by Mr. Dan Onks, again requesting a permit to operate a Christmas tree sales stand in commercial highway zone, and this is for property located at 125 River Rock Boulevard. Mr. Baumley.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. The subject property, as you mentioned, is located at 125 River Rock Boulevard. Is the current home of Waldron Enterprises. It also houses Benchmark Realty and Little Guys Movers. It is right next to the Marathon gas station, which is at the corner of Cason Lane and River Rock Boulevard. Property actually, to its north side, backs up to Old Fort Parkway, but it does not have any access to Old Fort Parkway. There's actually a barbed wire state-controlled access fence because it is so close to the interstate interchange on Old Fort Parkway. The applicant has secured permission from, and this is the first time where we have had proposed vending of any kind, Christmas tree sales or otherwise, on the proposed lot. The applicant has submitted a permission letter from Waldron Enterprises, who owns the property, and they have granted him permission to use the property. And what he proposes to do, you pull up the aerial photo. As I mentioned, the property is here on River Rock Boulevard. This is the Marathon gas station here. The applicant would like to set just a small amount of trees in this grassy area here on the north side of the lot. And Chairman Roger, you missed it.
I'm sorry, man. I was looking at my papers.
What you missed was me moving through pictures inadvertently again.
Where is it going to be?
It would be in this area here.
Okay.
At the northwest corner of the lot behind the building. And the applicant says that he would only like to have about 15 trees or so in that small grassy area. And he also proposes I need to work on that, don't I? Proposes a small 10-by-10 pop-up tent in these parking spaces here. He has gotten permission from the Marathon gas station next door to use their restrooms, and he has also received permission from Marathon next door to get electricity from the Marathon sign. There is more than adequate parking on site, and with the majority of the building being currently used for offices, there shouldn't be much conflict between the hours of operation for the applicant and for the permanent businesses that are on site. The applicant will provide a small amount of additional lighting for the display area, and the source of electricity, as I mentioned, will be the sign at the Marathon gas station next door. He indicated that he may also use a generator-powered portable light tower, but he has indicated that the portable light tower will not be shining towards Old Fort Parkway. It'll be shining back towards the tree lot. The applicant has, as I mentioned, has obtained permission from the Marathon gas station next door for the use of the restrooms. He will handle solid waste by keeping a garbage can on site and emptying it off site at the end of each business day. The site did pass its initial codes and zoning inspections. The applicant does propose to have the use there from November 23rd until no later than December 22nd, and this is within the time frame allowed by the zoning ordinance. Hours of operation would be from 5:30 until 9 Monday through Friday, from 9 until 9 on Saturdays, and from 1 until 9 on Sundays. And he indicates that he expects to average about 8 to 10 customers per hour at a maximum, but no more than 4 to 6 customers on site at any given time. If approved, staff recommends the following conditions. The site must pass an electrical safety inspection prior to opening for business, and an electrical permit must be purchased from the Building and Codes Department in order to obtain this inspection. And number 2, the tent must comply with the minimum required 20-foot rear building setback adjacent to the northern property line. Now I'll go over some photographs of the site. This is the front of the building. As I mentioned, Waldron Enterprises and Benchmark Realty are there. This is facing River Rock Boulevard. And this is the driveway that this site shares with the furniture store next door. And this is the grassy area where the applicant will like to set up his trees. Just another view of that area. There's the Marathon gas station next door, looking at the Marathon gas station from where the trees will be set up. And you can see the Marathon sign, which is where the applicant will get his electricity from. This is looking back towards Old Fort Parkway. The parking spaces that you see are where the 10-by-10 pop-up tent will be located. Just looking again at the northern property line. You can see there is that barbed wire fence there. I have talked to our traffic engineer, and he feels confident that with the barbed wire fence being there and with that being visible, he doesn't have any concerns about people trying to access the site vehicularly or pedestrian-wise from Old Fort Parkway. That might be a risky proposition. And this is looking to the east at the furniture store next door. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions, and Mr. Ongst is available if you have any questions for him.
I'm sure the Malibu could handle something like that, couldn't it?
Well, it's seen its share of off-roading.
All right, Mr. Ongst, anything you'd like to add to the application?
First, I want to thank Matt and Ms. Radel and the folks for the work that they're doing with you guys to get us that $500 waiver. We appreciate that. This is a new site for us. Our goal was to get visibility from Old Fort Parkway there on that high traffic area, and Waldron Properties allowed us to do that. I don't know if this is the appropriate time to raise a question to Matt or not, but we did this one where we've losing the deposit on the church, and I guess my other question is, by evidence here today, the sale of Christmas trees is and special use permits is governed by the city along with fireworks. And I don't know if there's other things that we do that require special use permits, like pumpkin sales or, Easter flower sales or things like that. But by what's consistently happening in the city of Murfreesboro, it's just nonprofits that are trying to sell these Christmas trees and raise money, them for the men's ministry at North Boulevard and us for our boys to do the things that our troop does. And I'm just wondering if the special use permit costs in some way can be looked at to minimize the effects that it has to us. I'm, paying $500 for the 2 special use permits that I need, and then a $500 deposit that I'll get back. So I'm always looking at ways to keep that money back in the Boy Scout group. And I know I've talked about trying to combine them into one, and that's not possible under the current city ordinances. So I would just, ask if we can look and see if there's some reason why Christmas trees is just something that has been a thorn in the city side for whatever reason. I don't know why it's like that. I can certainly understand the risk and all the things involved with selling fireworks, and as a citizen, and wouldn't take issue with that. But the commercial guys that come and go, he's been here consistently for more years than I have, and I look to be around for a lot more. So I would just ask you to look at that, if you would, Matt, or see if there's some way we can minimize that $500 expense that I'm going to have every year that I continue. I don't know what other cities do with that, but in the end, I'm hoping that, if I can open up another lot down the road somewhere in Murfreesboro as well. I'm just looking at the expenses and being a successful program. So that's the only question that I had for Matt and the folks in the city. And I'd certainly answer any questions that you folks would have for me.
I've got one. Do you anticipate having to put up any signage to direct them to the back of that building versus, say, parking at the Marathon or whatever?
I would be more than happy to put a sign up if the city ordinances would allow me to put those kind of directional guiding signs. But it's my understanding, and Amelia's not here, but it's my understanding that I can't do that. Now, I can put my sign up out there in the front like I've done in years past on the property, and I can have, I think she told me today, up to 8 signs without any sort of little spotlights on them or anything if they're in areas where there's no lighting. But by my understanding of the sign ordinances, I can't put a directional sign right there I can put a boy out there holding a sign, but I can't put a directional sign out there to guide them into that area. That's my understanding. I'd be happy to do that. The cost to us would be minimal to make a little, directional yard sale sign, but it's my understanding that it can't be in the easement, number one, and number two, that I can't have any sort of directional signs for that. Now, I could be wrong, but that's my understanding.
I think it's going to be a challenge to get people to the right property and to the right area on the right property. And I've directed Mr. Onyx to speak with Ms. Kerr to try to find solutions to that.
Well, I hope that within the limits of the ordinances that we could try to help them, because I think that you're going to see it. The question is, how are you going to get there?
Yeah, I mean, you can see it. My goal was for them to be able to see us from 96. I looked at several spots to do that. I had Kelton's, but it was a little bit farther down, and I had approval from the owner to set up my tree lot there. But it was just a little bit farther down from the traffic flow that I wanted to see us than I wanted to be at. And then I'd also talked to the bank there that's right in front of the Kroger about using an area behind their parking lot. But that was also not visible from 96, and this was kind of giving me visibility. I'm not going to have a lot of trees there, 15, maybe if whatever's good. You saw the area. Matt made it look a lot bigger than it really is. So there's not going to be a lot of trees there, but the fact that we're there with our Boy Scout sign, and the signs will have 2 locations. If they don't find what they like there, we can always steer them down, Cason Lane to Highway 99, and that was our goal. So. Lighting wise, it's pretty well lit. We're going to put a couple maybe ground lights down to shine up, or if we do get the light tower, and we're still working on that, then we'll use that.
All right. And the other question that you had about the permit fee and that sort of thing, that's well above our pay grade, but I'm sure Matthew would be glad to talk with you about that after the meeting.
Right. And Mr. Honest has approached us about that before. Because what I can say is the outcome of those conversations has been the fact that we worked with him to have the deposit on the site at the church, have that waived if the church agreed to be responsible for the cleanup. I think that was the solution that we came up with after talking to Mr. Onyx and hearing his concerns. Beyond that, I'm not sure what we can do, but I'd be happy to relay those concerns once again to Mr. Adler.
And it's a question. I'm just throwing it out there because I don't see us as going away, and obviously North Boulevard hasn't gone away, and right now we're the only folks selling Christmas trees in Murfreesboro, so we're just looking to whoever can give us a hand to give us a hand. Certainly the service hours that my troop puts in the city of Murfreesboro, cleaning up places around the city from Room in the Inn to numerous places, is well over 2,000 or 3,000 hours a year doing those kind of service things. So we're just looking for a little help as well.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Onyx.
Thanks, Matt.
At this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would please come forward. Seeing no one, declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
I'll make a motion we approve, subject to staff comments.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Onyx, that application has been approved as well. Thank you. All right, next item on our agenda is staff reports and other business.
Yes, sir, Chairman Rogers. I have a couple of things, just a few reminders that I wanted to mention. First of all, we're approaching the last 2 months of the year, which are the 2 months that our meeting dates are usually affected by the holidays. And so just a reminder that our meetings for both November and December are going to be on Mondays. The meeting for November will be on Monday, November 19th at 1 p.m. And the meeting for December will be on Monday, December 17th at 1 p.m. I see a lot of people out with portable devices. And my other reminder is just with regards to the teleconference. With our whole board, we are only lacking 1 hour of continuing education.
That's me.
No, I wasn't going to name a name, but everybody else is up to speed. Mr. Dodd just needs a half hour, but we still do have 2 remaining legal teleconferences, both of which are very applicable to what we do here at the Board of Zoning Appeals. On Tuesday, November 13th at noon, there is a legal teleconference in the legal department about our LUPA, which stands for the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, and we see a lot of religious land uses come before the board. And then on Monday, December 10th, we have a legal teleconference regarding conditional use permits, as they're sometimes called, or special use permits, as we call them, both of which are applicable to what we do. Whether you've received all of your continuing education credits that you're required by state law or not, if you decide to attend, we'll still provide you with a boxed lunch, and you are more than welcome to attend either or both of those. That's all I have.
All right.
Matthew, I will tell you and the chairman that I will not be here on the 19th of November because my daughter's having reconstruction surgery, and I'm going to go down there on the 10th, and I'll be down there until about the end of November with her. But I'll be here in December, I'm planning on being there, but not November.
Thank you. Our thoughts are with you.
Thank you.
Certainly hope
so
things
much.
go well. All right. Is there any other business? We're adjourned.